first speaker who will be appearing by Zoom is Nell Watson. Nell is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. She is a consultant philosopher at Apple. That's a nice role, isn't it? A consultant philosopher at Apple. She chairs a number of expert standard review groups at the IEEE. She is secretary of the board of directors of Humanity Plus, and I could keep talking about her accomplishments and roles for quite a while, but you'd rather listen to Nell. So Nell, take it away and talk to us about humane technologies.
Good morning, everyone. It's so fantastic to be here with you at Transvision. We're living in a time of profound technological change, and this is changing our society in different ways. Some of them for the better, some of them not so much. And today we're going to explore a little bit of what that looks like. It's clear that the last year and a half or so has brought so many of us together in new ways, which just weren't possible before. Many people have suddenly crossed the digital divide and are now able to enjoy experiences such as a telepresence checkup with their doctor, which just didn't seem feasible before quite recently. Above us, there are thousands of satellites which simply didn't exist a few years ago, which are now possible thanks to the massively reduced cost of getting into orbit. The world of machine intelligence is helping us to connect as well in new ways. The video stream on the right and left look quite similar, but the one on the right uses 1,000 times less bandwidth due to the generative capabilities of machine intelligence. This means that we can feasibly stream 4K video just on a standard 2G edge connection. This means that we're now in a world of radical telepresence capabilities because we can have these streams of high fidelity information, which can give us very realistic sensations in perhaps all of our senses soon from a remote perspective. This means that we can do meaningful work or meaningful exploration in faraway places in new ways. And this is going to have geopolitical ramifications. Today, many people feel as if their only chance for a better future is to leave where they are and go somewhere else. But through these kinds of new communication and telepresence technologies, there are opportunities for people to take their labor somewhere else, as well as to gain a picture of what life is like in other places, do some decent work for high value currency, and bring that home to enrich their community, and still be able to enjoy dinner with their family at night. That is a game changer. Metcalfe's law teaches us as well that the more people that participate in networks, including global knowledge networks, enriches all of us, because simply by adding more nodes, we have a massive increase in the amount of connections. A small increase in nodes creates a very large, disproportionate increase in the number of conversations which can be had. Today, there are new ways that we can solve problems. We can move beyond the polarizing binary of yes or no, or candidate A or B, and think more about maybes. Maybe this or maybe that. And we can have these decisions made in real time, where everyone can watch it being made. And we can witness the wisdom of the crowd in action helping us to make predictions about the future, helping us to work towards new forms of governance, such as futarchy, where we make predictions about the effects that a policy will have and make decisions based upon those predictions. Our eyes in the sky above us can connect with machine intelligence as well to gain a new picture of what is going on Earth. We can understand the true biodiversity in places which may appear barren. And this is providing inspiration and hope and helping drive people and inspire them to take action to prevent desertification and to regrow places which have been lost due to ecological damage. We can also understand the human factor in new ways also. Too often, people end up working in modern slavery in places like these brick kilns. But now we can spot these from space. We can pinpoint them with a little blend of machine intelligence and crowdsourcing insight to be able to find where people may be held, people who may be very vulnerable. We can do this in any corner of the planet, whether it's at land or even at sea. And we can use similar techniques to understand the effects of conflicts on human beings also. We can pinpoint where there may be damage done to even very remote communities, even if that state that they happen to be in may decide that they don't want that word to get out. Now we can understand where there are problems and help to find solutions for them and help to create a spotlight for vulnerable people who need greater care from all of us around the world. Together, this means that we can create new kinds of decentralized and distributed institutions which don't suffer so much from the risk of a single point of failure. We can apply machine intelligence to turn very complex policy and legislation into something which is easy to understand. Or conversely, we can take a simple natural language statement and turn that into very formal wording where that's required. We can even use these kinds of technologies to search for loopholes even before this legislation ends up being published. This means that we can borrow from the world of agile programming in order to refactor our institutions. Refactoring means doing a process, but in a simpler way to streamline it. You're still going from A to B, but in a way that has less technical debt, less overhead, and provides new room for further expansion or for further nuance, which might not have been possible before. The 2020s is seeing the convergence of AI or machine intelligence with the internet of people, places, and things, and the world of crypto as well. Crypto adds many new dimensions to this mix. And with machine intelligence, becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Crypto enables that decentralization in radical new ways, but it also enables us to align incentives in ways that weren't possible before. We can make it pay to play and to play nicely. We can find non-zero-sum resolutions to conflicts. We can get around the epistemic crises, which come in a world where anything can be counterfeited through generative technologies. And all of this together means that we have increased trust and coordination within society. And this is so important because societies increase in their complexity when trust and coordination become simpler. And trust is the greatest predictor of happiness in any society, irrespective of wealth. If you believe in your heart that your neighbor has your best interests in their heart, you will sleep soundly in your bed at night, whether you are rich or poor. And so if we can build trust, if we can build new institutions to reinforce trust using these new digital and communication technologies, we can create radically improved societies of greater, not only complexity and wealth, but happiness also. But then there's the flip side. And it's less positive, but no less crucial that we discuss this and that we have this at the top of our mind. These new technologies such as mRNA, immunity treatments, are in many ways an experiment in mass human augmentation, something which hasn't really been done before at the same scale, the same intensity, the same speed, on a global level. The capabilities are profound. It does seem as if these kinds of technologies may potentially create vaccinations for cancers or other kinds of autoimmune conditions, perhaps. And yet, in these times, we are also witnessing that in some places in the world, too many perhaps, the global health crises are being used as an excuse for greater authoritarianism, as an excuse for different governments to cajole and bully and even persecute people. Many people have concerns that after this crisis ends, if and when it does, that some of the technologies and some of the new assumptions about how the world works, which have been made, could end up as a Trojan horse for some kind of social credit style monitoring systems within many different societies. We have unprecedented changes in employment, in human rights, where people are being mandated to accept treatments or potentially lose their employment. Some countries, such as France, are now mooting the idea of mandating it for all citizens in all circumstances, at all times. And there have been very tragic and unsettling developments. These two ladies are friends, and the lady on the left is willing to donate one of her kidneys to her friend, the lady on the right. Unfortunately, they're not being allowed to because neither of them is vaccinated, even though they simply want to share their friendship and to protect the health of the vulnerable friend. There are places in the world, such as Israel, where hospitals have said, you know, if you don't have a green pass, something to show that you have been vaccinated or that you aren't currently carrying COVID, that you cannot enter the hospital, which would mean that even if somebody caught COVID, they couldn't get treatment for it. Now, this was eventually struck down by the court, but still, the fact that this is happening at all is completely unprecedented. At any time before the last 18 months, these kinds of policies for any governor or president or premier would result in a one-way trip to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. These kinds of policies violate very long-standing human rights accords that we have constructed as an international project over the past 70 years. These violate the very basic tenets of bioethics and medical ethics, the respect for the patient's autonomy, and the maxim that one must never do any harm. Our technological capability is expanding massively, and yet at the same time, we are seeing a moral and legal regression in a profound manner. And all of these ethical catastrophes are being committed for a justification of protecting people's health, even though that may not necessarily be the core reason behind many of these authoritarian interventions. A cautionary tale from history tells us that there was a time when eugenics was considered an acceptable domain of research until it was used as a justification for persecuting people. And now that domain is considered basically unresearchable. We should take caution from that, because we're living in a world today where those who, for whatever reason, do not wish to take an experimental treatment with no liability, those people are being persecuted. They are being persecuted in ways which would have been unimaginable just 18 months or 2 years ago. And there is a risk, a real risk, that transhumanism as an idea could become as tainted as eugenics has been because of what is going on in the world today. We didn't do this. This is not our fault. This is not what transhumanism or Humanity Plus stands for. But if we ignore it now, even though we are not responsible, we could become complicit in the consequences. Let's put ethics front and center, using our deep domain knowledge in this area. And let's all of us ensure that human enhancement will always be humane. Thank you so much.
Let's ensure that human enhancement is always humane. I'm not sure if you heard, there was a good round of applause at the end of your remarks, Nell. There is time for a few questions. There is a phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's a phrase that is particularly beloved by politicians. And as you've pointed out, there are politicians around the world who have taken advantage of the distress, the difficulties of the recent pandemic to bully and cajole and persecute. But do you see some better examples? Are there countries or politics which are, in your view, respecting the human rights and showing an example for the rest of us to follow?
I think, for example, some countries such as the Netherlands have been a little more forthcoming in, for example, enabling people to choose what kind of vaccination they want, which provides a little bit more agency and autonomy. And I think that's a small step in the right direction. But I think we are living in a moment where we have forgotten the hard work that we have done as a human species over so many decades since, in particular, the end of the Second World War, where we have put together codes and international human rights declarations, etc. And all of that's gone out of the window. And the amount of persecution of people who, for whatever reason, do not want to participate in these transhuman immunity therapies, it's getting nastier. It's getting worse. And I have concerns for where that could take us in the future. Because today it's immunity therapies, but in 10 or 15 years, it might be people who reject some kind of brain-computer interface, right? Or some other kind of surveillance technology, or say a financial technology which is linked with biometrics, etc., which makes it convenient for states, but of course may not necessarily be convenient or desired by citizens. And so this precedent here will set the future trajectory of how transhuman technologies are developed, how they are proliferated, and the degree of independence that we will have in the future to select or to choose whether we wish to participate or not. And that's why it's so important that we recognize the moment that we're at now and how that's going to affect our future.
Now, you talk about refactoring institutions, bringing them into, in some ways, a simpler and more effective form. Do you have some examples that you've seen or examples that you would wish to see?
I think things like tax codes seem to increase massively. And one of the greatest issues in our world today is that there is increasing regulatory capture of our institutions, a kind of revolving door problem where people leave government and they go into industry or vice versa, and every few years they swap between them. And so eventually the foxes are guarding the hen house, essentially. And institutions begin to not perform their function correctly. They enable corporations to self-govern and self-certify, etc. And pretty soon that ends up leading to less positive outcomes. And I think that if we can make things simpler, more efficient, and easier to understand, it is harder to obfuscate corruption. It is harder to bury tasty opportunities as loopholes within this kind of framework. And I think that that's going to be essential, particularly in a world where the world is becoming so much more complicated, where there is so much greater systemic risk, where the drive for efficiency reduces slack in the system, which means that when things inevitably do go wrong for whatever reason, it's far more likely to end up in some kind of pile-up, a catastrophe that potentially disrupts or even destroys the entire system. So the more that we can apply these kinds of machine intelligence and communication-based technologies to simplifying things, the greater opportunities we will have to avoid systemic risk in future.
We've time for just one more quick question. You mentioned now about your interest in cryptocurrencies and decentralization. I should mention we're having a panel dedicated to that whole topic later in the day after lunch. Is there any thought that you would like to leave in the air, or a question? If you were listening to that, the decentralization or crypto, which is the question or the opportunity or the risk that you would like to flag up?
Remind everyone of the great opportunities in blending crypto with machine learning, particularly, for example, in protecting privacy through things such as federated learning or part-trained models, where essentially, instead of you moving your data off your device into the cloud, a model comes to you, a small AI model, which is trained on your device, and then that model itself may be sent to a central location to be packed into a larger one. And that's a great way of helping to protect people's privacy and to ensure that there's less of our data floating around where it potentially could be used to harm us or to harm our interests. And I think that that's what we're waiting for. In the mid-90s, the web was too scary for e-commerce. If you put your credit card details in, there was very little security for whether they might be intercepted in transit or on the far end on someone's server. With the advent of things such as SSL, the little padlock in your web browser, suddenly that became a lot easier. And we were able to enjoy the world of e-commerce that we have today. And I think we're at a similar time where we need cryptography to help us to gain greater assurance in machine learning. And as these technologies become blended together, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see the professionalization of AI and accordingly a de-risking of it. So I'd like to see that kind of aspect add to the conversation later.
Nell, Watson, so much wisdom. We could talk to you all day and keep learning, I'm sure, but we must press on. So let's give a warm round of applause to Nell Watson.